If we have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Brandon Maxwell. I'm a consultant with a company called Max Haus that I founded a while back that does DEI consulting, and we're partnering with Best Friends on its DEI initiatives. So I've been hanging out with Best Friends for the last 9 months or so, and we've been doing a lot of good work as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Our DEIB director is Don. She's in the room, and our Chief People and Culture Officer is Joe Angelo. He should be here. All of our chiefs are moving around the space, doing what they do at that level of the organization. But I'm sure he'll pop his head in a moment. So, but it's good to see you, and thank you for coming to the conversation today. I do want to do a little bit of level setting and set some expectations for everyone in the room. We probably will not get to Q&A. We solicited questions ahead of the session today because we wanted to make sure that we could have a panel that felt comfortable for folks to participate in, which leads to my second thing. I believe in something called hey Joe, I just talked about you. I believe in something called double confidentiality. A lot of time in DEI conversations, people, especially people of color or from other minoritized backgrounds, are putting themselves on the line, putting themselves at risk by speaking truths that people may not want to hear. And so what I believe in is double confidentiality. That means you won't talk about what we talk about in this room with anybody else. Amen? Amen. That means you agree. And the second element is you won't address somebody on this panel about what they said. I don't want to see you in 5 years and you say, Brandon, that was that one time at the Best Friends National Conference in 2023 and you said this one thing. Because that puts me at risk, right? That might trigger me and make me not psychologically safe in a space. I'm a human, Jyothi's a human, we're all humans and we're changing every single day. So don't try to hold me to count in 2027 for something that I say today, okay? Can we all agree to that? Yes. All right. So we're going to have a fun, lighthearted conversation. We might also get really serious. We might cry. We might say a few cusses if that offends you. Sorry, not sorry. And we'll do our best to get out of here by 9:45. I got signals coming from people all around, so we'll do our best to do that. To get started, I would love for our panelists to share a little bit about themselves. So, my invitation to them was to share whatever they felt like you needed to know to contextualize what you're going to hear from them today. So they're going to share what's most important for them for your hearing.
I get to start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hello. This is a really long room. Yeah. I think that's important for all of you to recognize that. But beyond that, my name's Jyothi Robertson, and I am a veterinarian. I have been working in this space as a veterinarian since 2005, so I've been in sheltering for a while now. And I think for this audience, I want to state that I recognize that I come from a tremendous amount of privilege. I'm sitting here as a doctor, and I'm Indian, and I, am in a space that I am not representative of all BIPOC individuals, but I have been placed as a minoritized woman in this space since 2005. I actually started in sheltering in 1998, but as a veterinarian in 2005. So I come to this space from that perspective, and I hope that all of you have a real open listening when you're listening to us. So that's sort of my intention for all of you, is to have an open listening as you're listening to us today.
Hi everyone, my name is Nadia Oseguera. My pronouns are she, her. I work for the UC Davis Caret Shelter Medicine program. I'm not a veterinarian. And I hope that as a not so privileged person sitting here today, that I can shed some light on the experiences of BIPOC people in animal welfare. We are not all the same, but I do have a good sense of the challenges that we are enduring in this industry. I also just want to make it clear that this is not something where you check a box and you're done and all of a sudden you are an ally or you are set. So please continue to engage with the work and let this be one of the many things that you do in the DEI space.
So my name is Slim-Tolagai. I am the Navajo Nation program specialist with Best Friends, and I've been with them for about 2.5 years now. So.
Excellent. So, by way of further introduction, one of the things that I like to do in DEI conversations is to just define terms. Generally, we know what diversity means. It's all the things that make us human, all those things that we like to talk about, those categories: race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability, veteran status. The list goes on and on and on. Most organizations know what that is. It's the mix of the people that we want to get into this space. And also animals, human and non-human animals, I like to say. The second element is inclusion. It's about how do we include people in what we're doing? How do we pull people in? And in what ways do we need to pull people in to the organization to make sure that it's not just ornamental diversity, but it's diversity that has an impact because folks are included in our processes. The third element, equity, is harder for many organizations to understand, especially those that have really good in-house counsel, because we're saying based on people's backgrounds, their condition, their categories, we actually want you to treat people differently. And so a lot of times we get into the trap of saying equality, we're after equality, right? But really equity has a little bit more nuance to it. So I want each of you to maybe give a little bit of perspective on, in animal welfare specifically, what is the difference between equity and equality, and how do we make sure that our work is moving toward equity as opposed to sort of equality that doesn't treat history seriously?
Do you want me to start? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying that, George Floyd was killed by police in 2020. It is now 2023, so it's 3 years after everybody said you were going to listen, learn, you were going to read books and listen to podcasts. So if you still do not understand what the difference is, especially as an organization leader, please look it up. To that end, I will say that organizations should prioritize racial equity. I know that there are many inequities when it comes to gender, there's socioeconomic inequities, but when we're talking about race, it is like double down. So any financial inequities are much harder if you're a person of color. Some examples of how organizations can prioritize equity is by putting BIPOC people in positions of leadership and decision-making positions. We talk a lot about the pay gap, especially when it comes to men versus women, but we also need to talk about the pay gap between white and BIPOC. And even within BIPOC people, Latina people versus Black people. Last thing I'll say, I know that this conference is focused on no kill by 2025, and I just have to say that you're not going to get to that point if you are not promoting racial equity and if you're not uplifting the BIPOC people in your organizations and in the communities that you say you want to serve and help.
So on the reservation, I think we do have
I'm sorry, Keith, push pause. Just one logistical thing. I love DEI conversations where there are people who are like-minded in the room, and I love snaps and I love claps, but I also know that can create some tension in a room, right? Because if you don't like something that you hear and the person doesn't get a hand clap back, then that creates a different dynamic. So what I would appreciate is if you know somebody's email address, phone number, text them, okay? Email them your affirmation so we don't create disparity on our panel in terms of how we're responding to comments. Is that cool? Yes. All right, I love y'all, thank you.
So on the reservation, I think we have an equal opportunity to do whatever needs to be done. But I know that we don't have all the stuff that we need in order for our animal or our rescues, shelters, whatever, we don't have access to a vet just down the road. We had one, but she took care of the whole nation, and so I think just having more people coming in to assist. I know that's happening, but I think just getting that equal access or that coming in, I think is what's needed.
I appreciate that you mentioned that you don't have a vet there and that having that equal access is really important. From an equity standpoint, I think it's important that we recognize that not everybody has that access. And that's why we talk about equity versus equality, right? Equality, everybody's getting the exact same thing, but not everybody has that same access to whatever it is. And I think that's really important that we think about it in those terms. For my own self, I have a veterinary consulting firm, but I also have a nonprofit project where I do meditations, right? And so I put these meditations and people can join me. It's free. So from that standpoint, it's a very equal access thing, right? It's free. I know what time it is. It's placed online. But from an equity standpoint, the people who I want coming can't come because they are doing jobs around the clock and they can't take an hour out of their day to come meditate with me at 5 p.m. or at 9 a.m. because they're working. So I need to come up with other equitable ways that I can reach my audience. And so that's, even in my own space when I'm saying, oh, I'm giving this offering, I'm really not giving it, it's not equal. And so it is equal, it's not equitable. So I need to come up with ways to be equitable. What does it look like to put it on podcasts, to have it shareable, to have it in other sources as well? And so I guess I would encourage everybody to think about in what respects in their organizations are they centering equality, and where do they need to be centering equity based on race equity? Because that's actually where it starts.
So one DEI concept I hear all of you lifting up is perspective taking, right? So if I'm thinking about equity and creating an equitable structure, it may not be enough for me to say everyone needs access to a vet. I may need to think about, if I'm working with the Navajo Nation, what are the sort of cultural customs and traditions I need to be aware of working with that community? What are the historical inequities that have existed? And what structures do I need to put in place in order to address the historical inequity to create current equity in the system? How do I do so in a way that's culturally adaptable? That's another DEI word if you want to use it in your organizations, that addresses the needs of that community. We've talked a little bit in broad terms about equity. I want to meddle internally in our organizations for a bit. Sometimes language gets in our way, and there are these things that we have as assumptions in our organizations that we treat as sacred cows in some ways. Every organization has a chief of this, a chief of that, a chief of another thing. And one of the things that I've learned recently by working with folks from different tribes, the Paiute tribe, the Navajo Nation, is that can be a triggering word in many instances. And so I'm curious if we can utilize that example of the word chief in our organizations and how that might create perceptions or challenges for DEI just by the language that we use and don't question.
Well, for me, personally, I don't take offense. I think it actually is just the context of the word. I know that if you say chief of whatever, CEO, COO, whatever, then I know that it's describing a rank within a department or whatever. But I think I do take offense if somebody teasingly or just kind of say, "Hey, chief," or whatever, because I'm not a chief. I don't hold that rank, and that being an insult to an actual position within a tribal. A tribe or whatever. So for me, it's just so long as I think you recognize the word as whether it's a distinction in a department or in an organization, or if you're going to do it by an insult. So
Intention matters.
Yes, exactly.
And another thing I forgot to say three things at the top. Number one is none of us speaks for any of the demographics we represent. We speak for ourselves as individuals. So you might meet another Black person who has a different perspective than Brandon. Surprise, surprise. The second thing I forgot to say was shout out to folks that are listening on the live stream. We don't see you, but we are grateful that you're over there wherever you are in live streaming. And the third was just to acknowledge the person that convened our panel, Mia. Thank you so much for your leadership of this and having the sort of foresight to initiate this conversation for sure. Still in this vein of language, right? So are there other language things or assumptions that we carry in our organizations that, again, pose challenges to our DEI efforts that we need to start to interrogate or question to move toward this sort of structural, procedural equity that we're after?
Yeah, I'd like to share how we talk about communities I hear a lot of labels like underserved communities or the needy or non-traditional communities. So I'd like to say we are not underserved. We do not need to be served. We are resourceful. We're not needy, and we're not non-traditional. I think what you're trying to say is that we look different than the majority in animal welfare. And if that is what you're recognizing, I applaud you for that. But change the language from sort of coming from this place that you need to save us and you need to rescue us. What we really need is for you to give us the resources. So if you have spay neuter, give it to us. If you have funding, give us the funding, and trust that we are resourceful and we know how to take care of our communities, because despite not having all of the resources, we are still persevering and we're still doing fantastic. No, did you want to?
I was just going to go off of what you just said.
Yeah.
That's also in the way that we use the pronouns of us and them. Like, you know, when we remove and create that self-barrier by saying, well, they are having difficulty over there and we are not. And so I think that also speaks to that. And I think that a lot of the language, again, going back to what you had said, we can find that online now. You know, we can look up what words should we be utilizing and what words shouldn't we be utilizing. I love the fact you use the sacred cow, you know, and you know, and that's something that I think about, you know, as an Indian woman where cows are really sacred.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yes, so thank you.
When we were planning the conversation, I did say, like, I want us to model like how we do this organizationally, because I think sometimes we hear DEI and we think it's this mysterious thing and we don't know how to do it. And so we don't have any guideposts and we can't get, it's hard to give people like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's how you do it. But I think like modeling this tension, right? To be able to say, so when we say sacred cow, let's think about these things, right? So from my culture, here's what it means. And that's a respectful call out, invitation in to dialogue and relationship. And so whenever those things happen in your organization and someone might say, here's something that I'm bringing to you, you have an invitation, right? You can think about that as that person calling you out and get triggered and get defensive. I have 17 Indian friends. Or you can view it as an invitation to relationship and an opportunity to learn. So thank you for that.
Well, I do think it's interesting because you didn't set that up in that way.
I didn't.
Or you might have, and I'm not sure.
I didn't. I didn't.
But you might have known that I would say something to the fact that it's a sacred cow.
In hindsight, when I said it out loud, I was like, but I didn't want to derail, but we came back to it.
We came back to it. Just so all of you know, that was not pre-planned. He used that word.
So another, we have a time limit. I will stay there longer. But so another thing that we wanted to talk about today, based on a question that we received from you all, a structural thing that is hard for many organizations is to understand that, especially in the private animal welfare space, there are some assumptions we can make about what the majority of the room might look like if we go into it. It's going to be notably white, notably female. I think I've heard folks also talk about socioeconomic things, right? There's a certain socioeconomic lens through which we view our work. And as we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, there are these structural challenges that can be a challenge for some of our sort of recruitment and retention initiatives as it relates to people of color. When I first interacted with Best Friends, I remember sitting down with Julie and jokingly saying, like, so you're not gonna get no black people to move to Kanab, Julie. Like, it's just not. So if our DEI efforts are trying to get black people in Kanab, no. That drive from Vegas to Kanab, not even St. George to Kanab, I'm not gonna do it. So what are we doing here, right? So I think one of the questions that I want us to wrestle with is when we're thinking about recruiting, none of us represents our organization, so I'm not naming organization, but I think when we're talking, there can be this sort of, we don't know how to do it, right? And it's not because black people don't exist or brown people don't exist or queer folks don't exist or men don't exist, but there just seems to be this barrier to getting that diversity in the organization. What are some things that we can do to start addressing those perceived barriers to recruiting and retaining people of color inside of the animal welfare movement?
Okay, that is being addressed to me, it looks like, so, so let me go ahead and start. So maybe I can get a show of hands. How many How many folks in here sit on a board of an organization or are the executive director of an organization? Okay, so everyone who's raising their hand needs to be BIPOC in order to actually bring that community in, right? We need to start at the board, all the way at the top at the board, because we are not going to join organizations where we do not feel heard and represented. And that doesn't mean represented with other people who are doing the same exact thing or same exact position that we are doing. It's represented from the top and right at the top. And that means the board for me, right? I mean, that's the way I view it. It also means executive directors, CEOs. It does not mean a chief of culture, which are these positions that are developing, or a director of strategy and culture and talent, or an HR person. It means a board member. It means that when I am joining an organization, that I see people that look like me, who can speak to me. And so how do you get that? Because then people are going to be like, well, I don't know how to get that. Well, how are you going to get that? You go out into your community. You see who's doing the work in the community. It doesn't have to be related to animals. You don't need people who are veterinarians on your board, right? These are people who are integrated in the community in a meaningful way. That's who you draw onto your board. And then guess what? So before I became a vet, I was a teacher. I taught 3rd grade. I'm a certified elementary school teacher. And so that's how you build your veterinary pipeline for me. So I do access to veterinary care, right? 93% of veterinarians are white. So it's predominantly a white-dominated profession. And so how do we, when we talk about DEI in the vet space and access to veterinary care, like I never saw anybody that looked like me, right? And so what does it look like to be able to actually create that pipeline all the way from schools, from my 3rd grade students in my classroom, because they're seeing someone who looks like them, who's me, coming into their schools, talking to them about career opportunities that are never been recognized, right? So it's board coming down. I need to see it all the way at the top if I'm going to join that organization.
What I don't hear you saying, which sometimes I hear, so this is a common refrain that I think we talk about in DEI conversations. What I don't hear you saying is replace your entire board with BIPOC folks, but to think about the representation of the folks you're trying to reach and make sure that your board reflects that. Is that what do I hear that well?
That is.
So white folk, don't get scared. If you got white right? If you got white friends that get scared when they hear that, say, we're not trying to replace you. We just want to have an equitable representation on our board that reflects the community.
Well, if you're doing access to care and community engagement, well, then you better have somebody who represents that at the board level, because there is no way that you're going to truly understand those community needs if it's not coming from the community from the top. Right? You can't profess to be serving in that way. So that's what I'm saying. That doesn't mean replace at all.
Oh, absolutely not.
No,
I didn't hear you say that. I just want to make sure we said it for the
room. Okay. Well, I'm saying it now. So yeah,
we got to work behind, but with the rules.
Thank you.
Well,
I appreciate that.
And the other thing that I want to just add there, I'm a moderator, I'm not a panelist, but I'm thinking about how we have these perceived or actual barriers to entry. On many boards, if we don't know this, there are expectations, right? So if we have an expectation that our board gives at a certain level, and that's a financial commitment, does that create a barrier to access and equitable representation? I work with a board, I'm on a board in Atlanta for an org called LARSH. It works with people with and without mental health challenges, and they put them in community together, and there's a giving expectation. And so I'm a Black person in a certain socioeconomic status, and that didn't make me flinch, but when we said we wanted to increase the diversity of our board, I said, let's think about what that financial value is and other ways someone might contribute to the organization that's equal to that financial dollar amount, because they may not be able to give at that financial level, but they might still have gifts. So beginning to question those assumptions that we have about what it means to contribute and be a meaningful member of a board is required to create this equitable access at the top of the organization.
Can I speak to that for a minute?
Please.
So along those lines, I mean, if you're bringing community members onto the board, what they are offering is access to the community. So that is their equivalent of giving a donation or a payment or a fee. It is that window into the community that this organization is working with. And so I feel like that is, I mean,
Yeah.
that is more than enough when those are the goals of this particular organization, let's say, is
For sure.
to save all the animals to whatever it is that we have to work with.
Thank you. Y'all want to jump in? Anything else? I know I got a follow-up coming for you, Nadia, but anything else you want to add?
I agree.
Keith said, I'll retweet that. Or I guess you can't retweet anymore. Repost. So still, in this vein for a little while longer, I think the other thing that comes up a lot of times, especially in animal welfare, is thinking about the notion of psychological safety. What does it mean to be a person of color? In some organizations, a man, if you're the minority in that space, if it's a majority female organization, a LGBTQIA person, a person with a disability, a veteran, someone who chooses to eat meat. What does it mean to be a person? I mean, right, these are the diversities that we live with. What does it mean to create psychological safety for those who don't identify with the majority culture? And are there ways that organizations can consider implementing policies, procedures, structures that support employees and create a more hospitable environment that does make it psychologically safe for me to show up as a human?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this as a Latina who has experienced harm in animal welfare because there was no psychological safety. So if you are a mostly white organization and you have one or two BIPOC in your organization, it's not psychologically safe for them by default. If you have frontline staff or you do have, a bunch of BIPOC people, but all of your leadership is white, then there's no psychological safety. And I think part of the question too was, which Brandon, you didn't add that part, but it was also giving examples of how harm, so the opposite of psychological safety, how does harm show up? And I want to speak to my experience working for a national organization, not this one, the other one, the other orange one. And so we had various projects in Los Angeles. The folks on the ground who were actually doing the work, gaining the trust from the community, we were all Latina. The people who were in leadership and who were making the decisions were all white. And we all saw that, and we supported each other. But the harm that came from that is that we were expected to gain trust from our community, to go out there and do the work, yet when we came to give recommendations for programmatic improvements, we were dismissed. We were made to second guess that our wisdom, because we were the subject matter experts when it came to the communities that we were working with, we were gaslit. And this is not unique to the other national organization. I am sure that this is happening across animal welfare organizations. And I want to take this moment because the gaslighting that happens, it might not be intentional, but the impact is detrimental. The microaggressions that might feel just like a little joke or a comment, it's kind of like getting poked constantly, and eventually your skin breaks and you have to leave the workplace that you love feeling sad and diminished, and still want to come back because you believe in the work that you're doing. And so to that end, I just want to say that earlier we were talking, you mentioned how there's a lot of women, a lot of white women in animal welfare. So I want to put out a call to action to white women. Please stop replicating the oppressive systems that you have been victim to at the hands of white men. Because I see that a lot of the harm that myself and other BIPOC and animal welfare are experiencing are the exact same patterns that you have fallen victim to. So if there's anything else that you take from this, just please reconsider how you're showing up in relation to the BIPOC people that you're working with. Does that answer the question?
There's a response. There's never an answer. There's a response. And it's a response to the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
What it brings up for me is two things. Confession, the diversity that I bring to the table is, I used to call myself a recovering Baptist minister. I don't know if that fits anymore. I'm not Baptist. I'm humanist, probably more than Christian these days, but I still use some of those stories and how I engage work because they just formed me at a point in my life. And so the story that came to mind as you were talking is this notion of, in Hebrew scriptures, there's this community, right, that needs to be liberated, that needs to be freed. And the moment that this community gets freed and has an exodus from Pharaoh, they want the same exact structure that they escaped from. We want a king. We want the same structure. And that the deity in that story is like, but you know what it means to be under the oppressive rule of a king. Why would you do that? And the deity gives them the king anyways. Then the people become an empire. They start to oppress other people. And the deity's like, why in the world would you oppress somebody else? You know what it means to be under somebody's thumb. Clarence Thomas. Sorry. Wrong story. And so that's the invitation, right? To think about, if we're only defining equity and justice through the lens of white supremacist capitalist structures, then all we're ever going to recreate is that white supremacist capitalist structure in a different face. So what does liberation and justice look like beyond that which we've become accustomed to, right? And that's hard work. It's not going to happen in a 2-hour senior leadership team meeting.
Nope.
It's not going to happen with a 6-month diversity plan. It's hard, tough work. And I'm going to be real, it's scary work. It's scary as hell. I get the impulse to run. And I think one of the things that Jyothi, you said earlier that I felt really good about was the fact that this is human work. And a lot of times when we're triggered, because I got preachy, I got to come back.
I'm going to keep going off of what you
Go
said
ahead.
anyway.
Go ahead.
Okay. It's human work and it's individual work. And it stems from, I believe, unlearning, which means looking at those same systems and structures that you're talking about and recognizing the impact of those systems and structures on your own life. Mm-hmm. And then slowly teasing apart what those impacts are. And that's really hard. That is really hard because you are confronting yourself. And it's sad and it's scary and you see the harm that's happened to you, even as white men or white women. Every single one of us have experienced some of that harm in our own way, but it requires what, again, is termed in this DEI space as unlearning. Mm-hmm. Right? It's examining internally. That's why I do meditation. That's why I do grounding practices, because it's in that moment of silence and stillness when I am sitting still and I am forced to look inward and see the harm that I've caused to others, the harm that's been caused to me, and then unravel that in myself.
Yeah.
So it starts here.
Yeah.
Right here. So,
right there.
Right there.
Can I add, sorry, because you started talking about liberation, right?
Go ahead.
So dismantling white supremacy, the patriarchy, all of those harmful systems that are very much a part of our history in this country, it's going to liberate everybody. It's not just going to liberate BIPOC. So if you are also coming from a place of like, what's going to happen to me if we start, giving all the power to BIPOC? Are they going to do to us what we did to them? Or, are we going to be forgotten? So number one, no, we're not going to do the same things to you. But it's going to liberate you too. I talked about this in my presentation on Thursday, but look up the tenets of white supremacy and see how that is affecting your life. Upholding that system is also hurting you. So it's not just hurting BIPOC, it's hurting everybody. Just wanted to add that.
sometimes a question can be disarming in an organizational context, right? So like I think, especially those who consider ourselves woke or minoritized or whatever part of this struggle, I think we develop this muscle memory of how we respond to oppression and injustice when it happens and when it's in this. And sometimes it looks like stopping this, like I'm just glazing over. I gotta numb myself. Sometimes it looks like fighting. Sometimes it looks like saying all the words. This is white supremacist and here are the reasons why. And the white people get offended and get scared that I'm not white supremacist, I didn't own slaves and all that stuff. It happens. And I sit in the room and I'm like, all these things are true at the same time. And then I try to figure out what's the question that shifts this dynamic beyond a stalemate. I was sitting in a meeting one time and it was a white brother. We have a great relationship outside of this one meeting. And I perceived the dynamic to be about race. And my white colleague perceived it to be about whether or not we were going to build something on a particular plot of land. And the more it got tense, I just kind of went inside first to see, do I have, because I'm going to give black folks, brown folks, it's not your job to care for everybody else. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to care for everybody else and you haven't cared for yourself first, follow the NAP ministry online. That's a good friend of mine. I went to grad school with Trisha. It's about what do I have the capacity for? I tell white folks I have 5 white people I can deal with at a time at an intimate level. And I got 1 free slot. And I don't know if I want you to be in it. So I check myself first. And then I figure out what I have the capacity for. In this meeting, I had some capacity. And I said the person's name and I said, where does it hurt? What do you mean? I'm not hurt. What we're talking, where does it hurt you? It shifted the entire conversation in the meeting because now I'm framing it in terms of a human dynamic. We're not talking about property. I'm not talking about whether or not you're a white supremacist. You may be, but where does it hurt? How do we frame DEI conversations in human terms that unlocks what we desire? I got a sign a second ago, so I'm trying to wrap it up. I want to invite each of you to, I'm going to finish this thought as a disclaimer. I'm going to invite each of you to give a closing remark. If there's a final thing you want people to take away, think about it. I'm going to give you like 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to turn back around to y'all, okay?
Thank you for the warning.
We didn't plan that, so I'm just giving you, letting you know in advance. DEI work is human work, but what I don't want people to leave here thinking is that it's just human and it's just spiritual and it's just this sort of thing that makes you feel a certain kind of way. It is also about structures. It is also about policies. It is also about procedures. There are things that we need to do to create the kind of work environments that we all want to be a part of, and the work is human. And I think oftentimes what we do is we lean on one side or the other. And if we're only leaning in one direction, then we've already missed the mark. Can I share a little bit about what Best Friends is doing? A little bit? Okay. So there's a tool that Best Friends is going to use in the near future called the IDI. It's the Intercultural Development Inventory. This is not a pitch. This is not an ad. But the thing about this tool is it invites people to look internally first and to say, what is your shit that you bring to the table? Because oftentimes in race conversations and gender conversations, sexuality conversations, it's always about the other, the them. We need to figure out what black people need. We need to figure out what Latina people need. We need to figure out what the Asians need. Stop. Because race didn't start with me. James Baldwin said, I'm not a nigga. I didn't create that word. You created that word. So what does it mean about you? You needed that to exist. It starts with that question. So it's about cultural self-awareness so that you can build cultural other awareness. And so that's the first invitation, is to think about it at the personal level. What do you need to know about yourself? And you might find that that journey inwards helps you to understand empathetically somebody else's journey or somebody else's experience. 30 seconds, I'm coming to y'all. The other thing that I wanted to lift up from earlier, just as so we're taking, I saw some of y'all taking notes. Write down the phrase, if you've never heard it, intention and impact. intention and impact. That's an impasse where we get a lot of times where I call it smoke and mirrors, stunts and shows, fairy tales and fallacies. We get into a DEI challenge or an issue, a conflict comes up, and the offending party will say, well, I didn't intend for that to offend you. I didn't intend for that to harm you. I didn't intend for that. Your intentions don't mean anything. My grandmama said, good intentions pave the road to hell. I don't believe in hell anymore, but some days I wish I did. I need a place to put some people, but I don't believe the impact is what matters. You may not have intended to cause me offense, but the impact of what you have done has created not only offense, but harm. And we have to address the impact of our actions, even if our intentions do not align with what we thought our impact was going to be. Write it down, put it in your little policy books or something, and tell somebody at your job. All right, so closing thoughts. We have three-ish minutes. If you want to start.
Okay.
For me, I think we all have like these shiny books, right? That we're going to engage with community, saying that this is what's going to work. But I think that shiny book isn't going to work when you're not going to speak to those people who actually are living their experience, you know. So I think when you're going to bring people in, listen to them because they know what's going on in their communities. And that shiny book isn't going to, and open that shiny book and tear it apart, you know, because, and then start putting those pieces back, what you tore apart, put those back together, because it's not going to, that shiny book isn't going to work, always going to work. So.
Yeah, so I'd like to just reiterate, you know, 2020 was a time when a lot of the white folks in animal welfare said they wanted to engage in this DEI work. And just want to give you a glimpse on the other side of the aisle, BIPOC people. We were aware of what was happening, and we kind of saw it as like, okay, you open the can of worms, we don't have to pretend that this is not happening. So we also embarked on this movement, but we're doing it differently. So what I want to close with is saying, you know, to those who consider yourself allies, the train has left the station. You're welcome to get on. For those who are resistant or scared to join the movement, it's still going to happen. We're not turning back. And if there's any BIPOC person here who is not currently connecting with other BIPOC people, please see me after this. I got something for you.
Okay. So, Brandon, you spoke so eloquently that you took my words out of my mind, and as did everyone on this panel. I think that for me, I feel like you all made a choice to come here, you know, to enter this room. You had a lot of other choices. I mean, there are a lot of choices that are happening at the same time as this particular talk. So that already showed that you wanted to take that first step, or maybe you've taken millions of steps already. But the fact that you showed up here is one thing that I'm grateful that you did, because now you're listening to this conversation. And when you go, you have something to take with you, hopefully. Some ideas, some thoughts. And I love the intention versus impact, because I talk a lot about starting with oneself and setting your intention for how you want to show up for others. That's a big part of my work, is like, how do you want to show up? But after you show up, you got to do something. You can't just show up and not do that work, right? So the first step is that intention, but you're right, like, then you have to do something. So you all took the first step, right? You showed up. You all came. And so now what happens next? That's up to you. Right? That's up to all of you.
On that note, thank you so much for being here today. I want to form a connection with each of you if I haven't already. I also purchased Beyonce tickets for tonight before I knew I was coming here. So I'm gonna scoot out really fast, but that's not because I don't want to connect with you. So if you want to connect with me, my email address is Brandon@hellomaxhaus.com. send me an email. Let's connect in real life. But if you get me the next 14 minutes, I'm happy to holler at you for real, but I'm going to have to skedaddle after that. Because I want to